Welcome to the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden, where we unpack the strategies and solutions that make localization fast, scalable, and efficient. I'm your host, Stefan Huyghe. Good morning from Texas and good afternoon in Germany. We're here with Willian Magalhães. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm trying. My Brazilian Portuguese is rusty, Willian, so you'll have to forgive me. We're here in the Agile Localization Podcast by Crowden, and today we're going to be talking with Willian about his domain of expertise, UX writing and localization. User experience is what you do. William, why don't you give us a quick introduction of yourself so people in the podcast know who you are and what you do?
All right, perfect. Thank you, Stefan, for the invitation to be here talking to you about UX writing in this super important field, which is localization. So a little bit about me. I have been working in the tech industry for the past 8 years. I come from a linguistic background, so I used to be an English teacher. I taught for a decade, and then I have a degree in English linguistics. And after 10 years teaching, I thought, okay, so why don't I give a chance to another opportunity in my life, which is something that I also love, which is technology. So I went back to university, got my second degree in technology, and then I found out that I can join these subjects. And here I am working with technology and linguistics. And so pretty much this is where I come from. So nowadays I'm a senior content designer or UX writer. For me, only changes the title, but this is a conversation we can have later.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And of course, there's a big overlap between user interface and user experience and localization. So maybe you can, for the people that are not really familiar with what you do, can you explain how localization intersects with user experience writing and how that collaboration is crucial for global products in particular?
Yeah, sure. So localization and UX writing, they're pretty much connected. And I realized that because working with UX writing, it came to a point that we were talking about scalability and international markets. And as you are responsible, the UX writer professional is responsible for the content. Well, it's not different, right? So producing content for other markets is also your responsibility to coordinate, not to create. So, for example, UX writers that work with localization, you don't have to speak 5, 6, or 7 languages, right? You just have to understand how to make the original content scalable in a way that localization is possible. And you have to coordinate these professionals that sometimes are only translators. They're not localization professionals. And you have to bring this product perspective to these translators or localization professionals so they can know what they're doing, which is pretty much improve the user experience of a product, aiming at creating user-centered experiences. So pretty much a craft that is clear, concise, and contextually relevant for all markets that you're working with.
Yeah, I can imagine with your background from Brazil and also speaking German and being involved with languages before is of real help. What would you say the unique challenges in designing these conversational interfaces are for multilingual audiences in particular?
Okay, that's a good question. So for me, one of the biggest challenges in this whole process is to maintain the personality of your product in the other languages that you're working with. So for example, usually we work in English, and this is our original content. And when we localize this content, we need to make sure that the tone and the personality of the text that we wrote in English goes to the other languages as well. So for example, when you deal with humor, idioms, and cultural references, you need to make sure that all these three things, for example, are being localized correctly. So this is a big challenge.
And let's talk a little bit about the role of localization in product design more. How do you think localization contributes to inclusive and accessible product design in particular?
Good question. So to begin with, when you localize a product, you are including more audience, right? Because you're breaking the barrier and you're addressing cultural accessibility because of this. And localized products does not mean that we only updated or upgraded the amount of languages the product is available on, but also when you work with colors, date formats, and symbols, right? Because, for example, for Japanese people, if you look at the stock market in Japan, if a stock is going down, the color is green. And if the stock is going up, it's red. So this kind of localization is also important when you work with the different markets. So this is the importance of having a product that is localized.
And of course, tools and processes are ever more important in order to integrate localization workflows. What have you found the most effective integration for localization to be in the early product design cycles?
All right. So this is the challenge that we usually face, right, Stefan? Because when this localization topic falls into our laps, we need to find out how to include translators or localization specialists in the design process. And how do these people collaborate with us in the product itself? So, for example, it's very common to use Figma as a design tool in most tech companies. So, how do you create and design a process that these professionals are included in the design of the product? So, when should these people be involved? And this is where crowding, right, takes place, because they have integration with Figma, and it's easy for localization specialists to see the context on the platform as well. So, for example, imagine that you're working in a company that does not allow translators or localization professionals to go into Figma and see the product, because of sometimes they are freelancers or they are contractors and they cannot see all the design files from a specific company. So we can screenshot and upload context for these people to work. So this is something that we have been talking about lately, because localization professionals are there for their job to localize. But for them to localize, we need to explain to them what they're localizing, right? And we need to give them the right context. And we need to talk to them what we are doing and why we're doing. Because if we do not give context to these professionals, they might deliver an output that does not connect with our OKRs and KPIs, for example. So when you create mockups and ask them to identify issues that could happen, because they need to know where their content is going to be displayed, and they have to analyze the UI. And if they cannot analyze the user interface, the UI, you need to explain to them. So, for example, hey, this is a CTA that this is where it's going to generate our money, right? This is the CTA to buy, to purchase, whatever you decide. And then if they say, for example, okay, so the copy inside this CTA, this call to action, is too big and it's going to break the design. So what do we do? These kind of discussions with localization professionals enrich our product. So, and this is how you include them. Usually you will understand and have this maturity during the process. Like, I think I should have called one of the localization professionals right here, because I have this question and the person is not here to answer and to give their perspective. So as long as you work within the product and localizing it, you will understand when and how to involve these people into the design process.
It sounds like Crowdner really helps you closing that feedback loop with the linguists and making sure that there aren't any surprises on the back end linguistically that you didn't anticipate.
It does. And not only that, the integration among these professionals also include developers, right? Because developers need to know when to push the changes. Developers need to know, for example, when the text is not only ready, but also localized so things can be sent to production. So understanding this matrix, okay, so who do I call next? And who should I tell people that the content is ready to go, to be shipped and stuff like that is super important.
Very interesting. Let's talk about the strategic side of localization a little bit. We have so many occasions in which the C-suite doesn't really see the value of localization very clearly. And I was wondering, in your experience, how does localization drive business value beyond translation? How do you communicate that to your management team?
That's a very good question because as UX writers, you have to defend the user, right? You have to be on the user side. And for you to come to management and for stakeholders to tell them that localization is accessibility and localization is, at the end of the day, something that will generate revenue for them, you need to be prepared to explain why, right? So, for example, when the product speaks a user's language and it reflects their cultural context, engagement increases. And then you have to find how to prove this increasing in engagement of your product. So, for example, there are studies that say that users are more likely to convert when they remain loyal. And this is something that they say, okay, retention. Better than just acquiring new users, let's retain the users we have. So retention is also a very good metric for us to measure and keep track. So, for example, brand perception is also important. I have worked in a company that we started to localize our product. And it was very interesting because this perception of localization was driven after a talk that I gave in this company. I organized the talk. And then it was like one of those meetings that happen once a month in which an employee talks about a specific subject from their area. So I decided to talk about localization and how important it is for our users, about accessibility, how nice it is to have a product that makes the user feel seen. So after I finished this presentation, this coworker from marketing sent me a message like, hey, this is really interesting. And I think we should do that in the marketing side as well, because usually UX writers work within the product, so mostly tech and stuff. But marketing is also really important for us to localize and stuff. And then she said, I have realized that we are in these regions of the globe. So, for example, we are in Asia, we are in America, Europe, and etc. And we use the same image for all these markets. So I don't think we are reflecting the culture of Asia, for example. Let's generalize here. I don't think this picture that we use for our Asian market truly represents that market. So then they started to change the pictures based on the nuances of every market that we were present. And this is really important. And this is a negotiation with stakeholders and to talk strategically to them about it. So I believe that this brand perception, at the end of the day, generates revenue, and growth.
It's very heartwarming to have somebody that's involved in UX writing that's so knowledgeable about localization. So I applaud your input. So often I think in our industry, it's a big challenge to break down silos and advocate for the translation work that we do and show the value of it. Do you have any specific ways that you do advocacy for localization and maybe advice that you can give for people that are in a similar situation than you, but might not have the linguistic background to easily explain what they need? How do you advocate for localization and make sure that it's not seen as an afterthought within your organization?
Okay, so that's a good question because when we talk about the advocating for localization, you need to understand the markets that your product is included, right? So for example, you can A/B test that. You can, for example, okay, let's do a test in which content in this language will be localized and on the other language will not be localized. And then you can evaluate and analyze, for example, engagement. You can also, for example, another A/B test here is localize a content in one language and in the very same language do not localize and test them and see which content performs better. For example, time on task. What is the time on task of an onboarding, for example? So if you are explaining the platform for the user for the first time, and then you see that the localized content took, 30 seconds less for the user to perform the task that you wanted the user to perform, then you have proof that localized content is working better than the content that is not localized. So when you need to prove the importance of localization within the company, you need to talk numbers, you need to talk data. So for example, you need to say, hey, in this market, we have understood that localization might be some great help because the content is not localized. Analyze how it is now and analyze how it's going to be after you publish the changes, after you prove the content to that specific market. So this is one way to advocate for localization in the organization.
It sounds like it's important to make localization part of the KPIs right from the beginning so you can show that off to your management team. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, totally.
We've talked a little bit about breaking down silos between different departments, and that's an area of interest of mine as well here, how you collaborate and do teamwork within your organization, because often I hear it's like herding cats within organizations to work in localization. So what advice would you give to content designers working with localization teams for the first time to do it correctly and to be set up on the right foot?
Very nice topic. So my advice would be treat these people as partners. They're not service providers for your product or for your team. They are your team. So you need to include them in a way that they feel that the product they're working is also theirs. Because if they feel like, oh, I'm just going to release this content here and not see you again, I don't think this is the right relationship to have. Because they need to see that, okay, the content that they localized is doing this or is doing that. And from that on, we will work on other screens that will relate to that localized content that they did, for example. So one example is if you work within a company that has a reward system and your reward system has a very specific name, you will mention this reward system in a lot of different places within your product. In the beginning of the onboarding, for example, or when you're trying to promote something in the app, or even in email marketings that the user is going to receive, you need to make sure that there is consistency within the terms that you're going to use across your product. So if for this to happen, you need to make sure that the localization specialist is your partner in this scheme, right? You're not only, hey, translate this or hey, translate that. No. Like, hey, we have a challenge. We want to do this or that. Please also tell the translator or the localization specialist why you're doing it. Because if the product fails, like, hey, you go to the translator and say, hey, the product's not converting a lot. Is it something wrong with the localization? And then the localization specialist can say, but you never told us the meaning and the reason behind it was to convert. You just told it was informative. So we did it informative. So make sure that these people, these partners are aligned with the goal. So it doesn't mean that it cannot be like the product in English has one goal. And when the product is localized to other languages, the product has different goals. No, they're the same. They have the same goals. So make sure this is super clear to these partners.
It's often so true in localization that we should get or try to get a seat at the table very early on and make sure that people are aware of the importance of doing the localization aspect of the product correctly. We've talked a little bit about talking to your C-suite or the management team. Do you also approach the everyday workers in the team, so to speak, and implement some kind of mentoring as a localization expert?
Yeah, sure. So, one aspect of our work as UX writers or content designers is to write a copy that is scalable, write a copy that can go to localization professionals to work on. But we work, UX writers, we work with product designers or UX designers. And these people are designing the screens for us to write on. And something that we have to advocate in this moment for these members at all times, actually, is the internationalization. So, this is like a group of rules that we need to follow in order that we don't have problems when the content goes to localization. So, for example, you need to think that when you write content in German, it will probably get bigger, the words. And then when you write in Chinese, for example, it will be smaller. So, is the product ready for these changes? Or will the product look weird when the content is localized? So, this moment of mentoring the team members on, hey, people, we need to think about localization. We can't only think that this is in English, this looks good, but we need to think of how this is going to look like when the product is localized. So this is something that happens every now and then, letting the team members know about localization.
What would be your advice to foster collaboration between all these different teams? Do you have any practical advice for the cooperation of writers and designers and localization experts like yourself to work together well?
Sure. I think the most important thing is the sense of partnership. So make sure that everybody's feeling like a partner in this project together and share insights, ask questions, involve them, because writing is a very creative exercise. And sometimes your creativity goes really far and you want to write something that is not localizable, right? So you need to have these people sitting together with you and discussing the idea. So this kind of collaboration is super important.
Are there ways in which Crowdon helps you with that collaboration between the different teams?
Totally. So, for example, when you're working asynchronously, these professionals, the translators or the localization specialists, they can comment on the translation that they're having questions. So, for example, hey, I did not understand the context here. Could you please provide me some more context or explain to me where this content will be available, in which part of the flow, which kind of screen? Is it really important for us to convert at this moment, or should it be more informative, educational? So translators or localization professionals can work within the platform to create these topics and comment on translations.
Very well, very well. Let's talk a little bit about the future of localization and content design. We've managed to talk 25 minutes without mentioning the word AI, so you had to drop it at some point. So, what's your perspective on that? What role do you see AI playing in the future of localization for UX writing and content design?
I think the future of localization and content design or UX writing is for us to, when we reach a point that AI will be capable of providing natural content, content that looks natural for native people, for example. And I don't think AI is going to replace 100%, at least in this position, right? This role. It works already as a complement of what we do. So, for example, I use AI a lot to speed up my processes, right? So, for example, I can check if I'm starting with the right foot, or maybe I thought something different and then AI gives me an idea that I can pursue. So, for example, AI can give me something I can polish. It's very rare the moments that AI gives me the content that is already polished and ready to go. I really need to go round and round that content and polish it. It's wordsmithing, pretty much. But yeah, I believe that the future in this field with AI is to have content that is pretty much natural.
And I've also seen lots of implementations that are in the works for automated QA, for example, and localization. Are you working on those types of things as well internally, or that's still a little bit far out?
I'm working at the moment with machine translation and content quality assessments within CrowdIn. So for example, we have like a translation memory that we use within our products and projects, but we also have some complementary AI suggestions that we can compare and see how they're doing. Sometimes we get very good suggestions. Sometimes we need to rely on a more specific answer from a professional. So for example, a copy from a button that has been translated or localized multiple times within the product, we can rely on the translation memory or the suggestion from AI. But if it's something new and more complicated that we need the user to pay attention so the user experience is not jeopardized, then we need to, AI, not so good at this moment. Let's talk to a professional and see his or her opinion on this matter.
Very interesting. What trends or innovations are you most excited about in localization and technology, maybe, and how do they relate to your work as a content designer?
Okay, so innovations, I would say a content that is localized at the same time. I would say two things about innovations and localization that I'm pay attention and most excited about. Content that are pretty much automatically localized. This is something I would like to see. And a way for us to ship a localized content faster within the process of engineering and product. So for example, without having to ask the developer to push to production the changes that translators did, something like this. So I think pretty much summarizing these two answers into one, streamlining localization processes with AI and with things that do not jeopardize the process, but helps us to be faster in a way.
We've almost filled a half an hour just like that. We could probably go for a lot longer. Maybe one parting question on the way out. You're obviously a CrowdIn user. That's one of the reasons we're interviewing you. What's the most valuable feature that you could tell people about CrowdIn that you use on a regular basis?
Well, CrowdIn has a lot of power. I don't use all of its power, but it's full of integrations and things you can connect. But something that I really love about CrowdIn is how you can invite members and partners to your project. And these people, they have different roles within the product. So you can invite someone to be just a translator, and you can invite someone to be the manager of the project, and you can invite someone to be the developer of the product. So this is really interesting because we are pretty much open to work in a way that each person will have their assigned role and they will be able to work as their role demands. So this is something that makes me feel really comfortable about sharing my project with external translators and things like that. And not only that, I have used a lot and I like a lot that you can request translations from CrowdIn to third-party vendors. And this is super nice because you create tickets inside CrowdIn. You can connect with Jira, for example, and then you have all the statuses and everything. So this is super valuable and super fast as well, I should say.
Well, thank you very much, Willian, for putting a bow on our talk this morning or this afternoon for you. Thank you so very much. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime soon. Much appreciated and best of luck working as a UX writer in the future.
Dankeschön, Stefan. Dankeschön.
Bitteschön. Well, folks, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Agile Localization Podcast by CrowdIn. We hope you found it as insightful as we did. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to learn more about how leading companies are managing their multilingual content efficiently, Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Thank you for tuning in. For more resources on how to streamline your localization process, visit crowdon.com. See you next time.